Hey, thank you everyone for coming. Actually, it's a minute before 6, so I'll sit tight for a moment.
Hello, everyone.
Good evening.
Hello.
Okay, so my name is Scott Ritchie. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming. I'm a planner and urban designer with the city's Planning and Building Services Department, and I'm going to be project managing the cannabis operations study. Just to start off, just by way of, I guess, a housekeeping item, given that this is a Zoom call, I'm just going to ask everybody to keep their microphones off. Looks like everybody's already doing that, so excellent. And if you have a question, please use your raise hand function, and then we'll keep track of, where the questions are coming from. So I guess just quickly by way of background, for those that might not be aware, back in February 2020, the city of St. Catharines enacted an interim control bylaw, which basically put a pause on the establishment of new cannabis production facilities within the city. And the intent of that interim control bylaw, or that sort of pause on new facilities, was to allow us to undertake a study to determine whether or not the city should be further regulating these types of facilities. So we are now doing that study. That's the purpose of this meeting. This meeting is part of that process. And the city we hired SGL Planning and Design to undertake that study. And we have Paul Lowe's and Suzanne McDonald from SGL with us today. They're going to lead us through a presentation going over the first two phases of the project study, which included basically collecting background information on existing operations in the city and various legislation and best practices in terms of how other municipalities have tackled this issue. And then the second phase is alternatives for how St. Catharines might deal with this issue down the road going forward. That interim control bylaw I mentioned expires in February of 2022. So the intention is to report to council before that time with our recommendations for next steps in terms of how the city will or will not further regulate cannabis operations going forward. The only other item I wanted to flag, excuse me, just advance the slide. Oh, wrong way. So following this meeting, the city has an engagement platform called, I have the link up on the screen, it's engagestc.ca, and we will have a project webpage dedicated to this initiative on that site. This should go live sometime tomorrow. On that page, you'll be able to provide feedback. We welcome feedback tonight, but there'll also be commenting opportunities on that page, along with the video recording of tonight and the draft reports prepared by the consultants for the first two phases of their work. So I guess with that, I'm going to hand it over to Paul and Suzanne.
Thanks, Scott. Suzanne's going to do the presentation for us. Suzanne, do you want to take that away?
Yes, thank you. Can I confirm that you can all see the slides all right and can hear me okay? Excellent.
Perfect. Yes, looks good.
Wonderful. So thank you everyone for joining us this evening. As mentioned, I'll be doing a presentation on the cannabis operations study that we've been undertaking for the city of St. Catharines. And I wanted to start with the study purpose. So what we've been looking at as part of the study is we've set out to examine opportunities for the city to regulate activities permitted under the Cannabis Act, and specifically the commercial growing and production of cannabis. And as part of this study, we will be assessing and recommending any changes to the city's official plan and our zoning bylaw in order to regulate cannabis production as a land use. In terms of our scope, we are specifically looking at the land uses related to the commercial cultivation and processing of recreational and medical cannabis. Two things that are outside the scope of our work include the personal growth of recreational cannabis, because up to 4 plants can be grown within a household, as well as the retail sale of recreational cannabis in the stores that is permitted within retail stores within St. Catharines and is regulated through the province, and that's not the focus of our study. In terms of our study process, as was mentioned, we've completed phase 1, which included a lot of background review and background work, some of which I'll be highlighting for you this evening, as well as phase 2, where we've developed and considered a number of different options for what the city can do within their planning documents in order to regulate cannabis production as a land use. And I'll just mention that this is the purpose of the meeting this evening is to go over the different options, but there's no decisions being made this evening. Not until phase 3 will we actually be coming forward with our recommendations and any tools to implement those recommendations. And I will mention that in phase 3, there will be further opportunity for comment on both the recommendation and those tools. So this is just partway through the process. And we're going to be talking about the work that we've done so far this evening. So just a little bit of background on cannabis, or sometimes referred to as marijuana, within Canada. In 2013, there was the release of the Marijuana for Medical Purposes Regulations, which allowed for the growth of cannabis for medical purposes in facilities. And then in 2016, there was the Access to Cannabis for Medical Purposes Regulation, which permitted the personal growth of cannabis for medical purposes based on a prescription within Canada. And then in 2018 is when we had the Cannabis Act, which actually permitted the consumption of cannabis for non-medical purposes. That's when that became legal. And so then tied to that and found within the act is the permission for commercial production of cannabis within Canada. And so it's from that introduction of that Cannabis Act that we're undertaking this study. And so a little bit of background on how the policy, or how the framework of cannabis production in Canada works. An individual or corporation can apply through Health Canada for a license to produce cannabis. And there's a number of different licenses that they can apply for, which are listed here, depending on if they're looking to grow or to make products to sell for medical purposes. That part happens through the mail. Unless it's being sold separately through a store. Also, there's licenses to do research or testing on cannabis. And note that an individual or corporation can apply for multiple of these licenses for their facility, depending on what they're actually seeking to do. And a couple of highlights on some of the rules surrounding anyone who gets licensed to produce cannabis at a commercial scale. One, if someone is applying for a license, or if they receive permission for the license, or if it's changed or revoked, any of those things, they are required to notify the local government, the local fire authority, and the local police force. So the municipality will be aware of any licensed facilities that come into their into their boundaries. As well, only cultivation, propagation, and harvesting of cannabis is permitted outdoors. Everything else, such as your processing, drying, packaging, anything like that, has to happen indoors under the regulations. And also, none of those activities are permitted to take place within a dwelling under the licensing system. Additionally, the regulations set out a number of security measures that require that the site be designed to prevent unauthorized access and must always be monitored, and also that air filtration be in place for any of the buildings to prevent the escape of odor. And there is quite a detailed application process to go through in order to get a license for cannabis production. And I've got a little bit more information on all of these things found in our report, which, as Scott mentioned, will be posted on the city's website. So as part of our background work, we looked at a lot of relevant policy within the province. And one of the things that we did look at was the Farming and Food Production Protection Act, which applies within the province of Ontario. And this act defines agricultural operations, and it would include cultivation of cannabis. And basically, and the act states that no municipal bylaw applies to restrict normal farm practices carried out as part of an agricultural operation. So that's something that we need to consider as we work through this study, is to make sure that the recommendations align with the Farming and Food Production Protection Act. And I will note that there is precedent in Ontario for other instances where nuisance was considered in how regulating different farm practices, such as, for example, livestock. So these are all things that we're considering as we work through this process. As part of our work, we looked at different potential impacts of cannabis facilities and different concerns that are often raised with regards to these facilities. Some of the key ones that we've heard include concerns around odor, enforcement, property values, traffic, environmental impacts, and aesthetic implications. So those are all things that we've considered as we worked through this process. And another thing that we looked at is the existing planning framework within St. Catharines. So currently within the official plan, zoning bylaw, or site plan control bylaw, the term cannabis or marijuana, spelt either way, is not specifically addressed at this time. And we also know that there are 8 cannabis operations that exist within the city at this time. And I believe Scott mentioned at the beginning that we did quite a lengthy best practice review as part of our background work. And so as part of that, we looked at what different municipalities in Ontario have done with regards to permissions related to cannabis production within their municipalities. So as highlighted on this slide, a number of municipalities we noted have actually gone and made updates to their official plan to provide direction with regards to this land use. And also we looked at the zoning bylaws for a number of municipalities. And quite a few of them have also updated their bylaws to permit cannabis production as well. So this table kind of highlights a couple key things. As you can see in the first column, a number of municipalities have gone ahead and permitted indoor cultivation of cannabis within agricultural and rural areas of their municipality. Most of these permit this as of right in their zoning bylaw. That's what the check mark means. Some do require a zoning bylaw amendment, which is a separate additional process in order to permit the uses within the municipality. Similarly, we see many municipalities that also permit the use within their employment or industrial zones. And then outdoor cultivation is a little bit different. A little more than 50% don't permit outdoor cultivation within their municipality within agricultural and rural areas, but as you can see, there are, based on the check marks there are some that do. And then in employment areas, we were less likely to see permission for outdoor growth within the employment or industrial zones. As well, while we were looking through the different zoning bylaws, we made note of any specific requirements that different municipalities had in place tied to the cannabis facilities. So this common one that we saw was a setback distance between any new facility and any sensitive land use, such as your residential or institutional zone, which might contain something like a school. So we did see a range from 70 meters to 600 meters, although I'd say that 150 meters was the most common separation distance we saw. We also, in some instances, saw a separation distance between 2 cannabis facilities, as well as other requirements such as whether a security fence should be required, whether a loading space should be enclosed. We saw quite often a requirement for site plan control. We saw requirements that the design and operation of the facility must be in accordance with federal regulations and requirements. We also saw restrictions on outdoor storage and signage, and also restriction on residential uses located on the same lot. We also have been working with some air quality specialists who specifically deal with cannabis facilities, and they have indicated that outdoor growth is not recommended from an air quality perspective, just because of the odor nuisance potential. Indoor, they've recommended 150 meter separation distance between an indoor facility to a sensitive land use and a quantitative air study anytime a facility is proposed within 500 meters of a sensitive receptor, such as a school or residence. They also provided some details which are included in our report about how buildings can be properly sealed and equipped with with odor control systems in order to treat any air prior to discharging it to the atmosphere. And also we've included some notes on maintenance of the odor control systems. So from all the background work that was pretty much the end of the background work the summary of that we did in phase one. And from all of that work, we've come up with a list of questions for considerations for the city. And then for each question, we've developed some options and pros, and developed or detailed pros and cons of each of the options. So I won't go through the questions on this slide because I actually walk through them on the next couple of slides. So the first question that we looked at was whether or not to permit indoor cultivation of cannabis within agricultural and rural areas. So there is a couple different options that the city can consider here. First, they can go ahead and permit indoor cultivation in agricultural areas or rural areas as of right. So the pros of this would be that this aligns with permitting indoor cultivation of other crops in greenhouses in agricultural and rural areas. This is something we typically see. And also perhaps no official plan amendment would be needed in this case. In terms of the drawbacks or the cons, there's a little bit less information from Health Canada on the complaint mitigation system. If there's any complaints of nuisance related to indoor cultivation of cannabis. So there's the concern that nuisances might occur, and how that might get dealt with there's a concern that it won't be dealt with. Next, we considered if indoor cultivation of agricultural and rural areas should be permitted in the zoning, but only permitted in specific areas through a zoning bylaw amendment. So that would require anyone coming forward to go through a separate application process that comes back to council. So the pros of this is it does provide the town through that application process the opportunity to consider the use on a case-by-case basis and involve the public each time. And it also gives the town the opportunity to request studies in alignment with that application. And then the cons are, we didn't typically see this as often in the different municipalities that we reviewed. Most did permit the use as of right in agricultural areas. It is a more onerous process for the applicant, and it does separate cannabis from other agricultural uses. So then the third option would be to not permit indoor cultivation in agricultural rural areas at all. The pros of this is that it alleviates nuisance concerns related to indoor cultivation, but the cons is that we've actually not seen any examples of outright prohibition in the best practice research. So there's the risk that there's an appeal to the LPAT, and then there's also a risk that it may be deemed not to apply by the Normal Farm Practices Protection Board that relates to the Farming and Food Production Protection Act that I was speaking about earlier. So the next question that we considered is whether or not to permit the use outdoors in agricultural areas. In terms of the cons of permitting outdoor cultivation of cannabis the pros of permitting it would be that the cultivation constitutes permitted use in agricultural and rural areas. You typically see outdoor crops within agricultural areas. There is a risk that if prohibited could be appealed to the Normal Farm Practices Protection Board, and you wouldn't need an official plan amendment. Of course, the cons are that there's little information available about nuisance effects of outdoor cultivation. So it's a little bit more difficult to quantify to the extent that nuisance will be a concern from odor. And given that it's outdoor growth, there is going to be odor related to this use. And then the other question that we considered was whether or not to permit the use of or permit indoor cultivation of cannabis in industrial areas or employment areas. So the pros of this would be that post-cultivation uses, your things like your processing, packaging, that sort of thing, are actually quite similar to other industrial uses, things that we typically see in industrial areas anyways. And already employment areas are typically removed from sensitive land uses. Thus, there's that lessened potential for nuisance impacts. The cons are the same as that I mentioned earlier. What happens if there's nuisance and what enforcement to mitigate that nuisance is in place. And then on top of that, we will also be considering a number of the different specific requirements that we saw in some of the other municipalities' bylaws specific to this use, such as, for example, requiring a separation distance between this use and sensitive land uses, requiring that the use not emit any odor, a requirement for fencing. We can include a requirement for loading space to be enclosed within a building, and provide specific parking rates needed. We can also provide a restriction on outdoor signage and advertisement of this facility, as well as restrict outdoor storage. Also prohibit residential uses or dwellings on the same lot as a facility, and look at restricting retail sales on a lot, because we have seen or have heard that sometimes the province will provide licenses for retail in association of where the production facility is occurring. And the last thing that we looked at was site plan control, which is a separate process, an application process that would require prior to development for the city to provide input on the site layout of the plan. And it also allows the opportunity to request additional studies and enter into an agreement with the applicant. We looked at option one, which would be to go ahead and update the bylaw to make sure that the site plan control process applies to this type of use. So the pros of this is it provides the town a better opportunity to mitigate nuisance potential and enforce the matter through site plan agreements. It also allows the town to address specific issues or concerns such as odor, which allows them to enforce any if there's any issues down the line. And it also allows the city to ensure an appropriate building placement and site layout. The cons of this is that the licensing process does require Health Canada to look at the site layout in quite detail. So it's a question of is both needed? And then the option two would be to leave the site plan control bylaw as is and not apply site plan control to this use. So really the pros and cons are flipped, and it really comes down to how much control the city would like to have in terms of the layout of this type of use and what requirements they want to see the applicant bring forward before it comes in. So just a quick summary, the Federal Cannabis Act and Regulations outline that municipal bylaws do apply to cannabis related uses or cannabis facilities, but regulating any such use must be justified with rationale of what makes the use unique and what steps are appropriate to regulate any nuisance and concerns related to that use. And so that we've outlined many of those considerations in this report. And as I mentioned, this is more of an information presentation. So in phase 3 is when we'll actually be coming forward with our recommendations. So which of those different options are recommended, as well as the different implementing tools to bring them into place. So that's it for my presentation. Thank you for listening. I'm going to pass it back over to Scott, but I believe we'll be able to take some questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Suzanne. Just use 1 second here. Okay, great. Yeah, so as Suzanne mentioned, that today was about information sharing more than anything. It was about basically providing information on how cannabis facilities are regulated today in St. Catharines, how other municipalities have tackled the issue of how to, to what extent and in which direction to regulate cannabis facilities. And then the next, I guess the question we have to ask now is what makes sense for St. Catharines? And so I guess that's going to be the next stage of this process, is looking at sort of the options that we have and trying to determine what tools or combination of tools make sense for St. Catharines going forward. So what we can do now is we can certainly open it up for discussion. Everybody's welcome to ask questions of myself. We have some other planning staff from the city here and our consultants from SGL. So we certainly welcome any questions. And we would certainly welcome any suggestions that anyone might have in terms of how we ought to be handling this issue going forward. And I just wanted to remind everyone that the information, including the full report, will be posted on our website, on our Engage STC site tomorrow. And there will be a comment form there as well. So if you want to mull it over, or perhaps you don't want to share your thoughts tonight, we would certainly welcome written comments, or you can email me as well. I will, in a moment, I'll put up my email address, but it was also in the notice of the meeting. And I think I would have sent you all the link to this meeting. So I guess you already have my email address. So direct emails are fine as well. So any method of feedback that's convenient for you is welcomed. So I guess with that, I can open it up if anybody has any questions. I see Linda.
Okay, you can hear me now? Oh, now I can't hear you.
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Oh, okay, sorry. All right, I have questions because I live in Port Weller East. Our subdivision immediately abuts employment lands, being the industrial park that is north of Lakeshore. And right now we do have a cannabis production facility that is operating, that is directly abutting our residential area. Because this is why I know this from my neighbors who walk by and talk to people who are operating it, and they had their retail application sign up. And so the address would be 5 Peacock Bay. Okay, if people want to know. And so I'm wondering how on earth we have this cannabis production facility there, because according to the official plan, you're not supposed to have heavy industrial uses, which I assume cannabis production facilities would fall under because of the odor, etc. How do we have that against abutting our residential area? And what can we do about it?
I can't get into detail of that specific facility. I'd have to, I guess, check what the zoning is. But this process isn't really going to have, to be frank, it isn't really going to have any impact on existing facilities. Well, that's not entirely true. It could potentially have impact on existing facilities down the road if they wanted to expand. But anybody that is existing and operating legally now would continue to be able to operate as they are, is my understanding. What this study does is it could result in regulations that might limit the size or location or nature of new facilities that could be established down the road. Anybody that is operating now, if council were to enact, for example, if one of the outcomes of the study was council enacted a minimum separation distance between sensitive uses and cannabis production facilities, that would only apply to new facilities. Anybody that's existing could continue to exist as they were.
Okay, because I don't know whether they're legal or not. I just know that they're existing, and they have been there. They've told my neighbors that they've been there for 2 years. So I'm questioning whether or not, it went through the proper channels, and what we can do about it, because the smell is pretty atrocious. It being right beside a residential area, right?
No, I understand. I don't have the background on that specific facility in front of me now. But this is something we can look into more so, and I can get back to you with some more information on that particular facility.
Scott, maybe I can jump in for a second.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, they are licensed, so they have gone through the Health Canada process. If you do have some concerns about odor, I would recommend getting in touch with the owners to see if there's anything they can do on their end as far as air filtration or any of their HVAC systems, and we can help that as well.
Yeah, I'm not really thinking that they're going to be very receptive. I mean, they don't even have the barbed wire fencing around this whole property. So
they would have had to meet whatever the micro cultivation requirements were for Health Canada in order to get the license.
Okay. And also another thing that is in our area down Reed Road, but actually at the corner of Reed and Linwell, is a property that has, it's over 90,000 square feet of greenhouse. It is in agricultural area. in the last year, since this bylaw has come in, it was sold and changed from a flower greenhouse into a marijuana greenhouse. And right now, I don't think it's operating as that, but it's listed on realtor.ca at $3 million. But the listing actually, it's not just the it's 90,000 square feet of greenhouse. And there's also a 6-bedroom bungalow there. But the listing boasts that they're only paying $1,930 in taxes per year. Like, that's crazy when you've got a multi-million-dollar business and they're paying less than $2,000 a year in property taxes to the city. And that should be perhaps tied in with bringing in these businesses that are just, a license to print money, and that they're taxed appropriately in our community.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
if I can jump in quickly, Linda, we appreciate your comments on these site-specific instances. This isn't the forum to discuss this. If you'd like to contact us offline, we can discuss that. What we're looking for today is feedback moving forward in terms of land use regulations on how to regulate these in the future. Okay, thank you.
Well, yeah, that's what this is. This is a discussion while there's site-specific examples, but these are things that we know of that aren't doing well. And Director Kite, you don't return my emails anymore, so I cannot discuss this with you, nor your department, because so if you're trying to refer me over to you, I know that tomorrow I'm not going to be getting a response from you, nor your department. So this is my forum that I'm,
Linda, those comments aren't necessary. We'll move past that now and we'll move on to someone else. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Just maybe a few comments. I think that the big concerns for the city that they should be looking at are the things that are related to odor, and that there should be things in place to mitigate the nuisance odor, and that they'd be looking at setbacks and filtration systems very carefully. As you know, some of the existing ones that we have in the city now, if they are compliant, it's not working. So there has to be some extra measures that would give control to these things. I think that's where the city is going to find their biggest problems down the road with any site that sets up growing cannabis, even if it's in the agricultural area. Just looking at it from experiencing what is going on at this time.
Great, thank you. I see Councillor Garcia, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Scott. Just a couple of questions. I agree with Mr. Backer that the smell is probably one of the highest priorities, and I know that the presentation says that Health Canada already calls for no odors and filtration systems. As the previous speaker said, we've had other complaints that there is odor. So I think whatever we institute at the city level should definitely address the odor, and there should be pretty severe penalties in terms of fines or otherwise for violators. And I did want to ask Director Kite whether this is an area where we can consider a similar AMP system, I forgot what it stands for, as we are doing for the Airbnbs and the licensing for short-term rentals.
Thank you, Councillor. Once the short-term rentals licensing program begins in January, bylaw enforcement and licensing staff will be reviewing other bylaws to see what can be brought into the AMP system. AMP stands for Administrative Monetary Penalty System. And yes, nuisance bylaws have been identified as bylaws that we would like to bring online to the system. I can't say that it would be done for sure in 2022, but it's certainly at the higher list of priorities of the bylaws that we would like to convert over to an AMP system.
Thank you for that, Director. And for those who would not be familiar with this, that system allows us to more easily find people as opposed to taking them to before the courts and maybe spending months and all kinds of time trying to get them to admit that they are be found guilty. Just one more comment, if I may, Scott. In addition to the smell, I think controlling the recreational growth is pretty important, because I keep hearing that some people get around what they're doing and violate the law essentially by getting perhaps a medical or recreational license, and maybe getting multiple of those, and in fact having a much larger growing facility, whereas in fact it was only for minimal either recreational or medical use. So it's something that we should definitely look at in whatever regulations we put in.
Yes. I don't know if either Paul or Suzanne, you want to speak to that issue. I think what Councilor Garcia is referring to is the issue of, I guess, the assigned licenses. I think that's the terminology. You guys, are you familiar? Yeah, maybe just for the benefit of everyone that's tuning in, if you guys want to speak to that, and whether or not any other municipalities have successfully tackled that issue in their municipal regulations that you found.
Suzanne, maybe you can just give a summary of it and what we're finding in other areas.
Absolutely. So
I can jump in.
Yes, absolutely. There is the separate process for medical prescription holders. And the way that process works is anyone with a medical prescription registers with Health Canada in order to grow the amount called for under their prescription. And then if they do not wish to grow for themselves, they can designate someone to grow on their behalf. And up to 4 different prescriptions can be grown together with 2 different designated growers. So you could potentially have 4 prescriptions, as I mentioned, grown together, which can lead to a substantial number of plants. So we have seen a couple examples of different municipalities who have tried to who have regulated that type of growth, as well as the more commercial licensed facility that I spoke to most about in my presentation. We do talk a little bit about that process in our report as well. So there's definitely something that we can consider moving forward, providing some regulations, for example, within or requirements specifically in the zoning bylaws, so that those type of uses are captured. One of the things that we've been thinking about is whether, for example, you could not regulate just one prescription, which would be a smaller number of plants, but whenever you have prescriptions being grown together, where you have the potential for more plants, that's, for example, something that we could consider regulating through the zoning bylaw. So yes, thank you for the comment. It's something that we're considering as part of this process. Paul, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I just say that these dedicated growers are some of the biggest concerns, because they've gotten around some of the odor control that other larger facilities are operating with. So that is definitely a concern. It's something on our radar, and we'll be addressing in our report. And I just like to comment earlier on Councillor Garcia's comment on odor and Health Canada. It is a concern. We've seen it in many municipalities where there's continued to be odor requirements, even though they're licensed by Health Canada. So it's going to fall on the local municipality to provide that enforcement and also to provide the strength in both zoning and potentially site plan to ensure that the proper air filtration systems are installed in these facilities. So it is a big concern. It's, a lot of municipalities are finding that same issue.
Thank you both.
Thank you very much. Did anybody else? Oh, actually, gentleman in the red shirt showing up to Janessa.
Yeah, that's my daughter.
Okay.
Sorry. Hi, everybody. I'm just a concerned resident that live actually across the street. And my question is for Suzanne. Where did you go? Oh, there you are. here on my right hand of the screen. Suzanne, now what was you said that was the distance between a house and one of these grow ops? What's the actual length? Sorry, like how far distance?
So at this point, we haven't put forward any recommendations on what that distance will be within the city of St. Catharines. What we did in our analysis look at what other municipalities have done, and we did see a range of distances as low as 70 up to 600. But most of them were in the 150, 300 range. And that would be the distance between the facility and any sensitive land use, such as your residential property or a school.
And just to clarify that,
Yeah.
just to clarify that, that's for indoor facilities. And also we should just add that our air quality sub-consultant that's been looking at air quality on these has said even with air filtration, you should probably have a minimum 150 meter separation, just because there can be air quality odors that escape even with the air quality. So that is their recommendation in our preliminary report.
Well, that's my issue that I have right now, because basically this facility, Scott, I know you, because you didn't really know much about this facility. Right across the street is a house where there's children. Okay. This whole area has young children and elderly around here. And my issue that I've also done emissions testing for the government as well. Okay. They have to follow between protocols of a high and a low when you do an emissions test. When a vehicle passes, you have to fall in between those. Okay. Who's to say that this company is going to follow the protocols? Yeah, you can say they're going to put more charcoal filters and charcoal filters, this and charcoal. I'm telling you, it ain't gonna, the smell is not going to stop. It's going to be there, because it doesn't matter how, I know how much the charcoals cost. I've been doing a lot of research on this, and the smell is just one of the problems that I have. We have children in this area that have asthma. Okay. I don't even know why there was not even a public notice given out to residents in this area of what the plan is. We own a business in Western Hill there, and I thought there was supposed to be a public notice with some kind of, in this especially a cannabis grow op. And near residential, there's not even a public notice, but we'll have a public notice because somebody wants to build a house somewhere. And to me, this is really, I just don't understand. Like right across the street from a residential area, we got to build a grow op. Also behind this property, Scott, sorry, I don't mean to pick on you, Scott, I just say you're not familiar with this area. Behind that area, I know the owner of that, okay? There's hundreds of acres of property there that are actually not being used right now. So who's to say that these people in the future not thinking of putting this as a grow op, as an actual a large greenhouse operation, and where does it stop from here? I'm worried about, it's going to disrupt my living of life, because I can't stand the smell of marijuana. Nothing personal. I've actually gagged. I have people with our family have asthma. And don't tell me it won't stink. Like I said, it always comes down to smell. It's not just the smell. In Beamsville, I know this is off topic, Westbrook sold their establishment to a weed grow op. And my wife works at a long-term care facility. And it's all you smell when these residents are outside is, I know it's a different size we're talking about, but that's my fears, because if it's across the street and there's hundreds of acres there, who's to say they're not going to grow? Sorry, I'll stop. Shut up.
No,
I
that's
want to get some answers here, because it just seems like the residents here are not told anything. And this is like getting grandfathered in without nobody even asking, or even, like I said, even a public notice.
well, that's exactly why we're going through this process.
Scott, I just want to ask the gentleman, you keep saying across the street, what area of the city are you in?
Who, me? Sorry, is that me, sir?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Carlos, right in Western Hill, right across, like there's a house right across the street from that grow op, which used to be Hudson Welding. George Hudson owned it. I've been living here for all my life. And there's a house across the street that just sold right now. Yeah, they just sold the house across the street, and there's kids outside playing. And I live behind that, which is only a couple, not even 100 meters away. And I'm going to be smelling this crap. I'm sorry. That's my opinion. I'm just a frustrated person living near here. Why it just seems like they're going through all these renovations and we haven't started. Like, why wasn't this done before they even started going through all this renovations that they've done there? I'm sure they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars. I seen it every day when I go to work of what they're doing there.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. I mean, what you're touching on is the big reason why we're going through this study, is so that the existing facilities were able to open because they were permitted use under the city's zoning bylaw. Those are all on the ones we've talked about, the Peacock Bay and the one in Western Hill. Those are both on properties that are zoned industrial, intended for industrial uses, intended for uses that are going to generate nuisances. So the city had no authority to not permit them to operate in those locations. Through this study, the outcome is likely that we will, going forward, have tools to look at not only locational criteria for any new facilities from this point forward, but it also gives us the ability to better regulate those existing facilities if they ever come in with expansion plans, for example. That's when they would get caught by the new zoning restrictions if they wanted to expand or alter their operations in any significant way. What it doesn't, in terms of impacts from those lawfully existing operations, the ones that are licensed and that were established under the old zoning rules, under which they were permitted as of right, really we're down to the enforcement avenue as our tools. We spoke about that earlier, but also comes down to their licensing requirements through Health Canada in terms of we've heard it already tonight that they are supposed to not emit odors. I mean, we're hearing loud and clear that they do. So there is an enforcement challenge there, which we need to deal with in parallel to the regulations for new facilities going forward. It's got to be both.
Can I just say one more thing? I don't want to take everybody's time here. Another question is like, are they really allowed to be opened, or as the city passed it, they can actually continue on and move forward before even, like, I don't know where we stand here. That's what my problem is too, of what's going on here, because it seems like the residents of this area don't really know what's going on.
So I can jump in on that one.
Okay, thanks, Karen.
So from the city's perspective, the only area we would get involved in, because they're a permitted use under the industrial zoning, is their building permit. So they apply for a building permit, we've issued the building permits. The rest of the process is all through Health Canada and we don't get notified. So they are still going through their approval process with Health Canada, so they haven't started operating. But we don't get any notification from Health Canada about who's applied, how far they are in the process, when it's been issued. So unfortunately, we're not involved either.
So really, so basically, our city has nothing to do with it, but Health Canada is the one that runs everything. Then basically, what's going on?
Yeah,
so
and how that.
Sorry.
So I was just going to say, and how that could change going forward is if through this process we can update the city's site plan control bylaw to incorporate these uses. It gets a little tricky when somebody has an existing building and all they're doing is interior retrofits. That's a little trickier to deal with, but certainly for any new build. Once we have the site plan control bylaw in place, that allows us to deal a lot more directly with the layout of the property, the size of the facility, the mitigation measures through a site plan control process, which on the site you're talking about, we didn't have the benefit of.
Okay. All right. No, just sorry. I won't talk anymore because I just thought I could figure their grandfathered in, because like we own a property on Western Hill and we're not even allowed to sell cars because of the city bylaw that we can't sell cars because you weren't grandfathered in Western Hill. That's why I didn't know what was going on with this facility. They're doing all this work and I just didn't know if they're moving forward. That's why. But I will keep my mouth quiet. I'm sure everybody else has other things to say, but I appreciate all of your times.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Linda, I see your hand.
Okay, yeah, I just have a question because with this gentleman from Western Hill and our situation in Port Weller, how are these actually legal when it's under the official plan that you're not supposed to have heavy industrial abutting or across a municipal road from a residential area? Like, I'm just wondering how that can possibly be allowed.
Well, I believe both of those. I believe the sites we're talking about were both our industrial zoned properties. They they have been industrial zoned properties for many years in both cases.
Right, but like, I mean, have the official plan right here. It says the location of heavier, more intense industrial operations is to be controlled through the implementing zoning bylaw to ensure separation from sensitive land uses. Such uses should not be permitted on properties adjacent to or across a municipal road from a residential or commercial land use designation. So I'm wondering how, like,
Well,
that's when I'm wondering, I mean, that's the official plan. That's supposed to be, you know, running how everything gets developed. And we've got these businesses that are contravening that.
Yeah, I think it would be more helpful if we talk about the specific individual properties offline, just so we can stay focused on how we regulate new facilities going forward. But what I can say is both of those, both the Port Weller and the Western Hill, those are long-standing industrial areas that have been industrial areas from long before that official plan was written. So they would have been well established and existing before that.
Yeah.
Before those policies came out.
But
So Linda,
like
that
you
was
said,
the
something
answer.
that's industrial doesn't mean that it's a permitted use under the official plan.
It's a permitted
No.
use in the zoning bylaw. So that's why we had to issue a building permit for it. Okay, I'm gonna move on. I see John, you have your hand up again.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, is the city able to do anything for site compliance on existing facilities? And you know, thinking again of the non-commercial medical uses, the personal medical use, using an existing growing facility that's in place, maybe a greenhouse that's already in place, been there for many years. You know, they may get by without having to go for any building permit. Are the bylaws able to be applied to a site like that, where you say, well, being crop specific, looking at what they want to grow, can something be put in place that you say, okay, well, they're going to have to go and see if they meet the regulations according to the bylaws that are in place?
I welcome anybody to jump in case I'm off base here, but my understanding is that our zoning bylaws there wouldn't be anything in our zoning bylaws now that would allow us to intervene, as well as I don't believe our nuisance bylaws. I can't recall if our nuisance bylaw actually addresses odor right now. I think we might be at the mercy of Health Canada on a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, and perhaps I can jump in there, Mr. Bucker. The issue that we have really depends on unfortunately on a site-specific basis, and whether or not it's a property that's been gone through the proper channels, been caught up in the interim control bylaw, when it was established, do they have a Health Canada license? There's several layers of enforcement here. There's a local level that we talked about with nuisance bylaws and zoning enforcement. We've got the NRPS, who is responsible for enforcing actually the criminal code. And then we've got Federal Health Canada, who are looking at licensing these and have their own enforcement branch. But unfortunately, Health Canada has been preoccupied with the pandemic over the past 2 years and hasn't made cannabis facilities that much of a priority. Interwoven through all of this, of course, is privacy laws. The municipality doesn't get copies of the licenses. We have no way of knowing which properties are licensed, what they've been licensed for. And in fact, the NRPS doesn't have that information unless we've been voluntarily told. So when we receive a complaint from the public, each site is investigated individually, and we have to bring on our enforcement partners with the NRPS. Sometimes they need to go through a route of getting warrants and connecting with Health Canada. So these things aren't as cut and dried as, say, perhaps going out, just smelling it, knowing it's there. There's a lot of enforcement that happens behind the scenes, and those types of things take time. So in terms of existing facilities, it's the same thing. We would have to go through the entire gamut to understand.
Yeah, I'm not talking about existing facilities, but I'm saying moving forward, and someone wanting to set up and seeing a site that, well, here's already an establishment that we could move into and set up. And is there anything that the city can do to mitigate that? They say there's a process you still have to go through. There's going to be things you have to comply to.
And that's the purpose of undertaking this study. That's one of the areas that we are going to be looking at, is how do we deal with the retrofits. New construction is easier to, I would say, in a way, to regulate. We have all those inspections available to us under the building code. It's the retrofits that are of a concern to us as well. And we're looking forward to how this project can assist us with those.
Mm-hmm. And is there anything that the city can do as far as looking at where the product is going, the end user? And I know that there's probably privacy regulations that might interfere with that. But as far as, making sure that operations are being run legally within the city, is there anything that can be put in place?
That wouldn't be a city enforcement responsibility. That would lie with the NRPS.
Mm-hmm.
And also Health Canada, for those larger regulated facilities, they have to distribute based on Health Canada's regulations of who they can distribute to. So Health Canada also enforces that aspect.
Okay. Well, I don't see any other hands up. I guess so. So with that, I will thank everybody very much for their time tonight. And thank you for your feedback. We got some really good information about things we need to keep in mind as we move this forward. I mentioned this earlier, but if we leave this meeting and something strikes you, do not hesitate to send me an email or go on our Engage site and fill out the feedback form there. Within the next couple of weeks, if possible. I mean, I'm not going to put a firm deadline on at this point, but within the next 2 weeks would be appreciated, just so we can get moving with really coming up with our recommendations for council to consider when we bring this report to them, likely early in the new year is what we're working towards. So stay tuned. I will make sure that everybody that participated today is notified when it does go to City Council, so that you'll be able to review the reports. And if you depending on what you see in there, we certainly welcome further feedback at that time as well. And I guess with that, I'll thank everyone again for attending, and thank you, Paul and Suzanne from SGL for the presentation. Okay, good night.